Hey everyone, geophysicist Stefan Burns here with a space weather update. We've had some significant solar activity over the past few days, actually over the past week, because we've had some big sunspots on the Earth facing side that have been flaring like mad. And now one of our advanced probes in interplanetary space ahead of the Earth has registered a significant magnetic burst. Very high powered, about 6 times stronger than average. And so we may have a surprise coronal mass ejection headed our way. Now we had a massive plasma filament blast off yesterday early on the 5th of February Universal Time. And that's right in alignment with where that probe is now. But it's unlikely that this is the coronal mass ejection that is already sweeping by. So it's kind of a question of what exactly is being picked up by the solar orbiter probe, and is that going to hit the Earth? Because it's not perfectly ahead of the Earth, it is deviated by a certain degree. So we'll look at all the data and much more in today's solar activity report and the space weather report, and we'll do a question and answer at the end. So if you are watching this live, then please save your questions and type @Stefan Burns in the live stream chat, and I'll respond to as many as I can. If you're watching this after live stream, then you may want to watch through that question and answer, because that's the opportunity for people to ask direct questions, and some of them go a little off the beaten track, but I often will go into details that I may not devote an entire video to. So we cover a lot of very interesting things in the question and answer almost every single live stream. So that is the probably the most notable thing that's occurred on the sun over the past couple of days. Let's switch to our 131 angstrom view so we can see specifically all these solar flares, and then we're going to look at the solar orbiter data. This is going from February 5th to the 6th, and we've had 5 M-class flares during this time frame. We had a double M flare at the very beginning, a M1.2, quickly followed by an M1.1, so close together that they basically made up one event. And then we had a 2.7, a 7.6 M-class flare. That was today. That was the strongest M-class flare of the sequence, and also the first M-class flare of today, the 6th. I'm here on the west coast of the United States, so still February 6th for me. And then we had an M2.3 closing out the day Universal Time. You'll see that this big Giga Chad sunspot group is still very active, though it has decayed. And sunspot group 3981 has also decayed slightly, but still very complex, has a very kind of unstable magnetic field, and you see that very clearly right here, especially with that 7.6 solar flare. You see it really burst off, but it did not, in fact, launch a coronal mass ejection our way. That magnetic field, though it extended out temporarily, it did overall stay contained. So we don't have any coronal mass ejections that we know of coming in from that. This is what's been happening in regards to solar flares, and now we have this big sunspot cluster rotating towards the western limb, solar coordinate system, and the chance of there being a very powerful geo-effective coronal mass ejection launched from this has gone down quite a bit, though it's still not zero. You can have strong coronal mass ejections launched towards the Earth, even if it's not from this Earth center strike zone. We have historical examples of that. And if it was to have a big flare, any one of these sunspot groups, but specifically 3981, which is the most active and the largest and the most complex, if it is a flare from that western limb, that is magnetically connected to the Earth via the solar wind spiral, and so we could see a pretty significant proton radiation storm as a result. That is how we get the strongest proton radiation storms, is from strong solar flares in this region right there, either right on the western limb or even slightly behind now on the far side. We can look at our 304 and our 193 angstrom composite view, and we'll see this filament eruption as well as some other features. It hasn't been just that. You saw that at the very beginning. You also see a solar prominence eruption here, and then we see this coronal hole. So there are 3 things that we're also seeing on this view of the sun. There's that 7.6 solar flare, but this is going to repeat. There is that plasma filament. That was a big plasma filament eruption, as you can see, and there are still more on the sun in some pretty geo-effective locations. You will notice though, this is going to recycle right now, you will notice that this launched more towards the west and also to the south. And so if you look at that first glance, it doesn't seem to be Earth directed. There may be a slight flank effect from that, where just like kind of the edge of that plasma cloud will sweep by the Earth. But solar orbiters picking up some weird signals right now. We'll look at that data very, very soon. I want you to also see this plasma eruption that's occurring right here in just a little bit, showing that there is a very active sunspot group that is soon to rotate into view. And so while most of the sunspots right now are concentrated up here, and sunspots are about 160, 170 on the daily count, they have been for a while, that will soon rotate out, take most of those sunspots off the Earth-facing side, but it looks like we have new ones coming in, and we have a very powerful sunspot group. If it hasn't decayed much, that will be rotating into view around February 9th. We also have a Mercury Cazimi coming up. There's a whole bunch of stuff. There's a insanely massive earthquake swarm happening right now in Greece. That's what I've been covering with my most recent videos on the channel. I'm sure you guys have watched that. That is a troubling situation, because it's not like seismic swarms that we've seen before in the Aegean Sea, but that's off topic for this video. But there's a lot of stuff happening energetically right now at this moment in time. And if we do have a solar storm impact and we get some geomagnetic volatility, perhaps that could kind of amplify or disrupt some of these things that are already at play here on Earth, because we know there is a connection between space weather and terrestrial events. Let us look now at this solar orbiter data, because this is really what prompted me to make this video. This could be a surprise impact that we have coming up. So here we have, let's look at first off what is solar orbiter and where it is. Solar orbiter is a probe that was launched by the European Space Agency and also NASA, or at least they're the two agencies that help to basically keep it going, maintain it, crunch all the numbers, the data, etc. And it orbits around the sun and collects data on it. Sometimes it gets really close, sometimes it's over here on the far side, sometimes it's close to Earth. Right now, it is ahead of the Earth by about 0.19 astronomical units, and it's also fairly close to that Sun-Earth line. So it's only 22 degrees off. And when it's within 10 degrees is when solar orbiter is a really good probe for forecasting what type of solar wind conditions will have sweep by the Earth. Now we do have a probe or multiple satellites at the L1 Lagrange point, which measure the solar wind, but they're only 1% of the distance ahead of the Earth. So if the Earth is at 1 AU, then they're sitting at 0.99 AU. Solar orbiter probe right now is 0.19, or about 0.2 astronomical units ahead of the Earth. So it has a much further reach into the heliosphere, and it is out of that 10-degree alignment, which is optimal for space weather forecasting, but still fairly close in this zone. And so I think this data is worth looking at. Now here's the data. Here we have specifically the magnetic field of the solar wind as being detected by solar orbiter probe, and you'll see that it is on this massive upswing right there, and in fact it's getting close to 30 nanotesla. And so the solar wind is stronger when you're close to the sun, but pretty quickly it stabilizes out to about 5 nanotesla. And so it's not necessarily like it's 20 nanotesla here and then 15 there and 10 there and then 5 at Earth. It pretty quickly goes down to 5. And so when you are seeing a big spike in the solar wind strength, 0.2 astronomical units ahead, perhaps that is a coronal mass ejection that's also going to sweep by us. Thank you, Rachel, for the super thanks. And yeah, we will do, of course, many more live meditations and sound healings and such in future videos. This is a solar forecast. Those are more the kind of like the larger solar system broadcasts that we do, where we incorporate that. So this is picking up this big spike. Look at how sudden and drastic that is in the interplanetary magnetic field. I mean, that's increasing from a value of, what is that? That's showing 10 right there. No, 15 right there, all the way to 30. So a very sudden spike in the solar wind being picked up by solar orbiter right now. This is what the data is right now. And so it is catching something upstream of us. It looks like something just impacted Venus based on its location. And the question is, whatever this is it like this? Is it like perhaps like this? Or is it more like that, in that we are going to get hit? Because that plasma filament is basically perfectly positioned to have hit solar orbiter, but that only launched about 48 hours ago. And so I don't think it's traveled through the interplanetary medium that quickly. That'll probably brush over solar orbiter in just a little bit, though it very well could explain this if it did travel quickly. So we can't rule it out, but it also blasted off primarily to the south, and solar orbiter is basically along that ecliptic plane. So there's some questions here, and that's why I have the title as a surprise impact, because it's kind of unknown as to what's causing this. Now, I did talk about recently about how all these solar flares have been creating more ionization of the solar wind itself, which perhaps is going to just in general heighten the geomagnetic conditions that we experience here on Earth. So there is that. But again, it's a little bit of a mystery, and it's better just to present the data here, and then we'll find out what happens. And so without making too many interpretations. Now we can also look at our coronagraph to see what's been happening over the past couple days. Here we are looking at the solar wind emanating from the sun, the solar corona that then bleeds into the solar wind. This is 32 solar radii across, and this is the sun right there. It's denoted by this little white circle. They put a occluding disk over it so we can block out that light and better see the solar wind. Here's Mercury. So we have the planet closest to the sun right now on the other side of the sun, moving the fastest that it does through our night sky, performing a superior conjunction. So this is a superior conjunction Mercury-Cazimi that we have coming up at any moment. Well, basically in 2-3 days. And this will create an alignment with Mercury, then the sun, and then Earth. And whether that has any influence over solar activity is kind of up in the air. Some people say yes, some people say no. But regardless, this is an energy amplification and acceleration that's occurring as a result of the location of Mercury there. So we have Mercury coming in to do a Cazimi. We also have quite a lot of solar wind outflows right now. We see a big push right there. We also see this big push that just came up from the north. And in general, it's quite a lot of activity, but it's surprising that we've had all of these solar flares blast off from Earth direct, yet none of them really launched any coronal mass ejections our way. Instead, we got coronal mass ejections in every other direction. So while we had a ton of solar flares in light energy, like extreme ultraviolet and X-ray light energy hit the Earth, we didn't have any coronal mass ejections that were launched our way, it seems. We just looked at that solar orbiter data, so perhaps that's also, there is something headed our way. But this Earth-facing quiet phenomenon seems to have kind of played out again to some degree with what's been happening now. Let us look at what has occurred over the past 6 days, going from February 1st to the 6th, because we noticed this big ramp up in the energy starting really around February 1st. In general, I'm talking about the larger energetic picture. We incorporate the Earth, we look at the sun, everything. February 1st was a notable shift. Why? Well, we had this massive influx of earthquakes starting on the 1st in Greece, which is definitely the most energetic thing that's occurring right now on the planet. We also, as you see, had the massive growth of sunspot group 3981 starting around February 1st. This cluster here maintained itself fairly well. It has now started to decay as it's moved towards the western limb. But 3981 is in general maintaining itself quite well. A little bit of decay there, you see that, but still quite complex. And now we have new sunspots rotating in. You'll notice at the very end, we do have some new sunspots on the eastern side of the sun. They are rotating in. And so we have that also happening at this moment in time. Yeah, we have some freckles on the sun and they are moving out, but we have new sunspots rotating in, and we likely have more solar activity coming in the days and weeks ahead. We are in solar maximum. Let's not forget that. I want to also show you the X-ray flux over the past week for the same time frame. And here is our X-ray flux for the past 7 days. We can see all these solar flares as a result of this. So I'll step off here. We see that this is going from February 1st when I had that sunspot graphic set up. And we can now see all these spikes here. So we had a big burst of solar flares from 3981 when it was really growing, going from the 2nd of February to about the 4th. Things did cool down, but we had some pretty strong solar activity today with this 7.6 M-class flare right there, which only pales in comparison to the 8.88 solar flare right there. This one also is pretty strong. I think it was a 6.7 though. And so there still has been some significant solar activity, though there's been longer kind of dips in between. But in general, even with there not being continuous machine gun of M-class flares over the past 2 days, the overall baseline of X-ray flux is still elevated, because here we see what it was back on February 1st and the 2nd, right there about the 10 to negative 6 level. This is watts per square meter of X-ray flux. This is the soft part of the X-ray wavelength, so it's like 1 to 8 angstroms or so. Here, you'll notice it's quite a bit elevated above that, especially back there, but it has not returned down to that more baseline. And in fact, during solar minimum, this will be even lower. It'll be way lower. So we are still experiencing, just in general, heightened solar flux as a result of solar cycle 25, this solar maximum, and this big, massive sunspot group that traveled across the Earth-facing side, with new ones soon to appear. And the sunspots that were on the far side of the sun, they released some huge coronal mass ejections that we picked up, full halos going out. And so it's interesting that we had a ton of flares on our side, but no coronal mass ejections. But then we had a ton of coronal mass ejections go from the far side. But again, we may have that coronal mass ejection come in because of this solar orbiter data. We can actually look at the most up-to-date data right now. Let me pull it up. And it'll be punched in for you guys too. It'll be zoomed in. So it'll be a little easier to see. But this is the data completely. And also, of course, the location of Solar Orbiter Probe, which is detecting a coronal mass ejection impact at this moment in time right now. Here we go. Here is our latest data. And let me put on the display capture. So, oh, not that one, this one. So we can see again here, it's really zoomed in now. This is our total magnetic field as observed by Solar Orbiter, 0.19 astronomical units ahead of the Earth. Here is about normal conditions, went up to slightly elevated, strengthened even further. And then once it got to 15, which is 3 times stronger than normal, suddenly it is spiked up. This is where it is right now, just in between 25 and 30 nanotesla, probably about 27 nanotesla at this moment in time. You'll see the southward component, that BZ component, here's denoted BN, but it's the BZ component as it relates to the solar wind that we're familiar with, undergo this massive oscillation there, showing a lot of volatility. So if this is something that will sweep by the Earth, it's going to be significant. It'll give us a jolt. We also see that here across our other components. Just a big swing in the volatility. So something swept by Solar Orbiter, and I mean, based on my assessment, I don't know exactly what it is. That filament that launched off, I can show you that again for anyone that's jumping in right now. Let me show you that filament one more time, that big filament right here. This guy launched off at the very beginning of February 5th. And so for it to already be hitting Solar Orbiter in less than 48 hours is pretty significant. I don't think it traveled that quickly. If we go back, this is the beginning of February right there. So it would have had to travel 0.81 astronomical units in less than 48 hours. Not impossible, but it's just not exactly lining up. It's not exactly lining up. So a little bit of a question as to what this is from and whether it will impact us. So that is what's happening right now in terms of the space weather, the solar activity. let us jump into the question and answer before we go too long into this. So if you have any questions, please type at Stefan Burns and I will answer them as best I can. No, a lot of you asked questions earlier on, but I was in the middle of the presentation, so I hope you're still around. And thank you, Nirka, for the appreciation, the thanks. Thanks so much. Appreciate all of you being here, helping support the channel, and for your interest, because a teacher can't educate without students. And so in some ways, I just consider myself just a teacher on all these varied topics I have an interest in. Because what I discovered is that the best way to learn something is actually to teach it. So you do the research, and then you create your materials, and then you present them. And that presentation itself is what really cements it in your mind, at least for me. And so that's one of my little tricks, you could say, and one of my skills for learning things and retaining it. It's not just reading the paper and then being done with it. It's doing all this stuff, looking at the data, all of it, summarizing it, condensing it, presenting it. That really helps it sink in for myself and for others. So thank you all for being recipients of that. I really appreciate it. So Emma Rose asks, does any of this affect the Southern Hemisphere? So yeah, there's a lot of times people ask questions like, what's the effect on the Southern Hemisphere versus the Northern Hemisphere? When we're talking about a solar storm impact, basically it's the entire globe. And we need to stop thinking about, what's the impact on France, or what's the impact on the Galapagos, or the Southern Hemisphere, Northern Hemisphere. Like, there are some regional differences because you have the poles. You have the North Pole, the South Pole, the magnetic poles, right? And so there will be varying effects, but in general, a geomagnetic storm is a global phenomenon. And so you have to expand your viewpoint and your perspective out a little bit beyond just your own local area. Now, right now, the Southern Hemisphere is facing the sun a little bit more. So it's receiving more light radiation, but that's different than a solar storm impact and a coronal mass ejection impact. Light goes from the sun to the earth in just 8.3 minutes. A coronal mass ejection can take 15 hours at the absolute fastest, but more like 2, 3, 4, 5 days to reach us. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. And Jared asks, could the planetary alignment be pulling the solar wind towards / away from it? Yeah, so we can look at that. Well, actually, it's kind of difficult to pull up that alignment right now. But the planetary alignment is something that isn't super well understood by a lot of people. I actually can pull it up if I pull up Stellarium. And even here, it's not going to do it justice because we're looking at it through a screen. And so it's going to show up really condensed together. But if you actually go outside and you look at these planets, you'll notice that they're pretty far apart, right? And they're also at different distances from the sun. So it's not like we have a line of planets right now in between, like, the sun and then Earth and then this line of planets. It's just in the night sky. If you go out at this moment in time, you will see Venus. Here we go. You'll see Venus, and then and you also see Saturn right below. So right when the sun sets, you'll see Saturn, and then you'll see Venus. They of course are moving down this way, setting with after the sun. Then you could see Uranus if you have very good eyes and clear skies. You have Jupiter nearby. Let's not forget that Neptune is actually right in this area as well, basically conjunct Venus at this moment. Just a little bit behind Venus actually, right about there. And then beyond Jupiter, you have Mars. So we have basically all the planets other than Mercury. Mercury is about to conjunct the sun. Remember, we just looked at that. Mercury right now is basically conjunct the sun, but it will move into position very soon, and you'll have this alignment of all the planets. But it's not like they're aligned gravitationally in a vector in a way that's going to affect us. They're just all in that kind of zone of the solar system. Now, is that influencing the solar wind? Not so much. The solar wind is mostly driven by the sun. So, I mean, I can't comment definitively, but it's driven by the sun. It's more about how it's impacting the planets rather than the planets like pulling the solar wind or anything. Because the solar wind has almost no density, has a lot of charge, but it's very low density, so gravity doesn't have much of an effect on it. Hope that answers your question. Some more questions. Again, type at Stefan Burns. And Cassiopeia asks, does the Schumann resonance affect clairaudience? That's a question beyond the scope of this video. Sorry, but I talk about that. I've talked about that often on some of my other videos, so you can check those out. And then we also have from Ambrosius, do you suspect that these odd energies are like buffered upgrades coming in little pulses? I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that. And everyone's experience of these energies is different. So what may be odd for you may be nice for someone else. So yeah, hard to answer that question. I would suggest maybe you watch my videos on how solar activity can influence your health and wellness for a more detailed response. Cosmic Zeal asks, what do you think February 28th will look like? Again, that's one of those dates connected to the planetary alignment. And that's because Mercury will be in a good position at that point. But, you know, we get these planetary alignments actually quite often because we've had the outer planets clustered close together for a while. So this is not some once every 10,000 years event. Like we had this planetary alignment last year and basically the year before and the year before that. So these aren't super rare things. They're just nice things to actually look at astronomically. The thing is, most people don't go outside and actually look at them astronomically. They just see these social media posts where all the planets are wedged up right against each other and they think that there's some special force as a result of it. But if it's a planetary parade, it's really, I don't think it's that significant, you know, energetically or astronomically. It's more about conjunctions. Like for example, right now, Moon conjunct Jupiter, that has like a significant energy to it. Of course, that happens once every lunar cycle. So Gamer asked, do you know anything about the Sphinx hidden data related to the possible influence of the star Regulus in the actual solar activity aligning with planets and Earth? I think I know what you're referencing, Gamer. Because someone actually just emailed me recently. There's a phrase in a book by Chris Bledsoe talking about when the star Regulus aligns pre-dawn in the gaze of the Sphinx. So there's going to be like this release of new information and truth that's going to like change the world. But that there's no timing information in that phrase. If that's what you're referencing, there's no specific timing. We need to know when the astronomical alignment occurs. Is it solstice? Summer or winter? Is it equinox? Is it some other specific date? Like there's no timing information because that happens once a year. You know, any star will line up, let's say in this instance, in the gaze of the Sphinx right before the sun rises every year, once a year. So we need the specific timing information for that to be important. And it's not in that phrase, which basically collapses the whole thing. So that's why you have to learn astronomy and understand this stuff. Because if you don't know the details, then you could think that's a very powerful thing that's going to occur, but without that key information, it's worthless. So if you're interested in this stuff, I have a course on this, which will teach you all these fundamentals. And it's astronomy, it's mythology, it's also astrology. It's the Planetary Resonances e-course. There should be a link in the video description. You could check that out. 15 hours of video content from me. But more than 20 hours of content if you do some of the exercises in the lessons. We go over everything. All the planets, their synodic cycles, astrological ages, the great year, the precession, some of the things for precession that aren't well known or talked about often. It's super in depth. A lot more of you should be signed up than you are, that's for sure. I think you guys just don't know what it is. But it's amazing. It's what has helped me to get all this into context because it was making that course that helped me to really up-level my knowledge and understanding of what's happening in our solar system and be able to present that to you. Yoga with Beth Bentley asks, what causes ears to ring? Well, there's a few things. One of them just in general, nowadays in the modern day, is electromagnetic noise and electrosmog and pollution. If you are, like, for example, standing under some high power transmission lines, you will hear an actual buzz. And if you go farther away from that, it just may become like a subtle ear ringing, right? So a lot of that ear ringing is actually caused by electromagnetic pollution and noise. 5G can also do it. 4G can also do that. I have direct experience with that. Tons of people do. That's one reason why so many people are having that ear ringing phenomenon because there's been a huge rollout of 5G over the past 5 years. And so those are the predominant reasons why there can be ear ringing. I would say that's 99% of it, and other things like solar activity would be like 1% of it. So typically I would put that on like EMF pollution. Of course, there's actual like health things like tinnitus and stuff, which can be caused by other issues and pressure imbalances and stuff. But if we're talking about outside influences, electrosmog is like 99% of it. Because you can go somewhere, if you're having it, you go somewhere quiet electromagnetically, it'll probably go away and you may not notice it because once it's gone, you're just intuitively like, thank you. And you move on to more important things. Maureen asks how to get alerts for filaments, or am I always looking? Yeah, I just keep my eyes on this, but they do have apps that you can sign in and get alerts for stuff. Like Space Weather Live, I know does that. I know NOAA has a direct way of doing that as well. And Jen asks, am I familiar with the 3 days of darkness narrative? Yeah, that's just like the end of the world narrative, and people have been calling for that for hundreds of years. So maybe at some point, but I'm not buying in on it, and I also am not making any predictions as to the 3 days of darkness. That's not my jam. Paige says, thank you so much. Thank you, Paige. And Brandon and Mark Running Club, do you know that the new GOES 19 images are on the testbed website? No, I've been looking for them though. So if you want to drop the link, Brandon and Mark, in the chat, then do that and I'll click through and we can give that a look. I don't have the URL for that testbed website yet, but I'll find it eventually if you don't drop it. What happened to the large asteroid headed towards the sun some weeks back? Was it destroyed? Well, we had a comet. I don't remember there being an asteroid headed towards the sun. We had C-2024 G3 Atlas that had a close perihelion and eventually did disintegrate, but it survived its rotation around the sun, its perihelion 0.09 AU, when it initially passed, but then it later disintegrated. But I'm not sure if that's exactly what you're referencing. One of mine asked, do you have any opinion on giant crystals and their ability to emit an electric charge? Could it be an EMF that could have an effect on Earth's magnetic field or on life forms? Well, crystals are a crystalline molecular structure. So that you have these different elements and they can form molecules. So you have, like, for example, silicon, oxygen, they can form SiO2. Now you have a molecule, silicon dioxide. That's quartz, the most common mineral on Earth. Well, they can also form a whole bunch of bonds together and form a crystalline structure. And you have electrons that get embedded within that crystalline structure. But because it is a crystalline structure, it's pretty inert in general. Like, unless you apply some sort of change to it, it's not really emitting like a constant electrical charge. That doesn't mean it's not influencing the quality of the electric or magnetic field in the area that it is. It has some influence over that passively, but you get an electric charge emitted from a crystal when you apply pressure to it. It's called piezoelectricity. And so if you apply pressure onto the crystal lattice, it'll cause those free electrons to actually basically pop out and generate an electric signal. And that's used for a whole bunch of things. Our bodies are piezoelectric because we have semiconductor materials within our body, for example, collagen. And so just having a big crystal near you, it's not necessarily emitting like a stream of electrical energy. You'd have to apply some sort of like pressure onto it. It may be interacting with the electromagnetic field passively due to the fact that it has a structure, an actual crystalline structure, whereas, for example, air, the air around it, may not, right? It doesn't. But I hope that answers your question. And I think we're caught up on the questions. No, still a few more questions. One more question from Jung says, what CME number do you think would break the power grid? Well, that's the thing. Coronal mass ejections don't necessarily have a number to them. I mean, we can measure them in terms of their plasma density, their velocity, the magnetic field, its configuration, but we don't have a specific number for coronal mass ejections like we do for solar flares, which have a very clear designation. So we would just want if we wouldn't want this, but in terms of something knocking out the power grid, whether just in a local area in high latitude regions or something global, then that scales. Something like a super flare could perhaps knock out technology or a lot of technology globally, but that's way up there. That's like an X400 flare, X500, X1000 perhaps. Whereas a Carrington class flare would be like X50, X30, maybe going up to X100. That's the amount of X-ray light that's being emitted, but it's really more so about the velocity of the coronal mass ejection. Again, it's plasma density, the solar wind characteristics, all that is very important as it relates to the actual felt impact on Earth of a solar storm impact. Elia asks, how has this been affecting the Schumann resonances? They seem to be fine and normal, though there has been a little bit of heightened volatility with the Schumann resonances. Just a little bit I've been noticing over the past few days, but nothing too dramatic at this moment in time. In general, solar maximum increases the power and the frequency of the Schumann resonances over a long time period. So we have that happening right now. But in terms of like a very sudden, noticeable change in the Schumann resonances because of this solar activity, it's very subtle. You're going to get much bigger changes in the Schumann resonances in your local area due to local weather systems like a thunderstorm or snow or things of that nature. Huge Heart asks, what impact does the magnetic burst have on the tornadoes we're having right now? Well, we don't know if this is going to impact the Earth, though there's a heightened probability now that we've seen this data. And what that will do, if it does trigger a pretty significant geomagnetic storm, is that it will strengthen the global electric circuit, creates these stronger telluric currents, the ionosphere gets charged up, the atmosphere gets charged up more, and in general, that just creates more available energy in our atmosphere, and therefore, these weather systems can be enhanced and amplified. And it's not, where the energy flows is a big component of that. It may not flow to an area that has a lot of potential, like these tornadoes, for example, that you mentioned. I'm not aware of the tornadoes, but it very well could. We've seen before how certain storms have amplified pretty radically and dramatically during solar storm impacts and geomagnetic storms. But it's not a one-to-one guaranteed every single time thing. But if you just in general understand it, you can see how it starts to affect these things. Likelihood of aurora in the south. Yeah, as of right now, they're not really putting too much of an estimate. NOAA does have a forecast out for perhaps semi-active conditions tomorrow, but they didn't put any alert like G1, G2, G3, nothing like that. So right now, the aurora has, in general, been good over the past week or so, but I can't exactly comment. But if this does hit us, then the likelihood is going to go way up. So we'll see. I mean, a 30 nanotesla, let's move over to that graphic really quick. A 30 nanotesla magnetic field for the solar wind is very strong. And so if this was a hit with this property right here and the total field strength goes to 30, then yeah, we could be looking at a lot of aurora and we could be looking at G3, G4 storm. But we don't know if that's going to hit us because again, this is occurring here, 22 degrees off of the Sun-Earth line and upstream by 0.19 AU. But it is happening fairly close by. It's not like the Solar Orbiter probe is over there. It is fairly close to Earth, which is why I'm making this video. Eric asked, do coronal mass ejections affect your dreams? Well, I am in conversation with someone who has a lot of lucid dreams. Like this guy's a pro, and he has noticed an effect from geomagnetic activity and dreams. And as someone myself who has very vivid dreams almost every single night, I keep a dream journal and everything, I can also vouch for that. I'm not going lucid every single night, but I do also notice more powerful, vivid dreams when there's geomagnetic volatility, like what you get from a coronal mass ejection impact. So yeah, it does affect your dreams. One more question from Mary is there such a thing as solar flare sickness? I feel like I'm in a constant state of motion sickness. I mean, for being honest, that's probably not from solar activity, though it has been active. And so at times it can be easy to peg it to one thing versus another. But, and there is, space weather can affect health and wellness. We know that. Geomagnetic storms. But I think a lot of people, if we're being honest, I think a lot of people misplace their health and wellness symptoms on something. I think some people, I'm not saying you, but I think some people do it kind of consciously because it absolves them of responsibility of actually addressing what the root cause of that health and wellness problem is, because you can't do anything to change the sun. So that's not to say that solar activity and space weather and solar maximum, all this doesn't affect us. That's why I talk on this channel about ad nauseum. But we also can't deny that a lot of times that is used as kind of a scapegoat for our actual health and wellness things that we need to work on. So you really need to keep a log and a journal and really track this stuff religiously if you want to discern out the difference and really be honest with yourself. And so that's what I would recommend you do. If you are someone that has been noticing this, track down every single solar flare when it happens, keep a log of all your symptoms, and also keep a dietary log, keep a toilet log, write all that stuff, a sleep log, and then you'll be able to figure it out just through the power of data. So that's what I would recommend. And can it make us cranky? Yeah, that's something it can also do. But again, I feel like people overblow these effects. A lot of people say there's no effect, and then some people say it's everything. And so I'm very much someone that's in the middle, more moderate, kind of, I hope, a little closer to the truth. I do a lot of education. I have multiple videos on that. You can go through my videos and check those out. And with that, we are going to wrap up this live stream. So thank you all so much for joining in tonight. We'll see what happens as it relates to the solar wind. We can give it a look really quick, in fact, because I actually haven't gone to the solar wind itself as measured at the L1 Lagrange point. So let's just go to that really quick before we sign off. I think it should still be totally nominal conditions, and it is, but let's just do the thing, which is right here. And we see that our solar wind strength at this moment in time is 7 and 2. So right now, solar wind is fine, it's normal, but in terms of the solar orbiter probe, it's registering a big spike in the magnetic field of the solar wind, and that could be sweeping by the Earth very soon. That would be in less than 24 hours because of its distance. So yeah, that is the update for today. Thank you all so much for watching. Again, I've been your host, Stefan Burns. Also, just because we've had some questions on the health and wellness, one moment here, I want to show you, people know I've talked about this before, but I have a variety of wellness products on my website that I make myself that are designed to help you with a variety of things, because I'm very, very big on health and wellness. So you can tell I'm not 400 pounds, right? So if you need more rest and relaxation, Tranquility is awesome. It's chamomile, dandelion root, calendula, also lemongrass, peppermint, really good for helping you calm down. It's like anti-anxiety, helps you sleep. Really fantastic, great for gut health, which is the root of a lot of health problems if you have, tummy problems. And then another one that a lot of you love that I'm sure new viewers will be interested in is spirituality, which is purple lotus flower, chamomile, passion flower, and mugwort. And this also is very helpful for rest and relaxation, for activating the parasympathetic nervous system. Also a little bit of an aphrodisiac, but enhances your dreams, helps you sleep better at a minimum, enhances your dreams, meditation, even perhaps like astral experiences. So people reported that. This stuff is awesome, all organic. I have a whole bunch more. I have herb coffee, which is a great coffee to have in the morning. I have like fruit tea, which is really good for your immunity and also tastes really good. There's electricity, which is like a kind of like a coffee replacement. Really good iced tea, gives you a little bit of a zap. Really good for your mental focus and neuroplasticity and all that because of ginkgo and yerba mate. There's vitality, which is good for hormones, also an aphrodisiac. Really good for like, feeling a little bit more embodied. There's crystals on the website. There's earthing shoes. The earthing shoes I have right here, these help you to stay grounded day in, day out. Bare feet is best, but if you're out and about, then these earthing shoes are awesome. And actually, on the topic of earthing, if you want to learn more about the whole philosophy behind grounding and earthing, why it's good for you, and also the spiritual evolution that comes with it, then I have a podcast interview that I just did with a young chap from the UK. His name is Ali-Reza. And it's a really, really, really good podcast because he's super deep into earthing like me, and he has some really good questions. So I'll put a link to that in the video description. I'll also will link that in the comments. I highly recommend you give that a watch because I haven't released a video specifically on earthing recently, but we go and cover everything there and more. So go check that out. Show Ali a little bit of love, and thank you all so much for being here. Happy to help support you both informationally with this video, with the update, and also with products like the ones I have on my web store, wildfreeorganic.com/store. So thank you so much for everything, and I will see you all very, very soon. And please take care.